Hello everybody, it's Garrett here with Ginger Kid Studios, here today to give you a brief overview of Adobe Bridge and Camera RAW. Now some people prefer to use Lightroom over Bridge and Photoshop. However, I find for organizational purposes, Bridge and Photoshop has a much stronger tool set. When you open Adobe Bridge, you'll see that there are several widgets you can move around the screen to your preference. For example, you can move the content window, preview window, adjust them to various locations throughout the screen, change the size, format, and all of that to be able to better lay out your workspace. Personally, I prefer to have the content window on the right with the preview window center and large so I can see very clearly the image I'm about to work on. This is all personal preference, so you can do whatever works best for you. Keep in mind that if you don't see a window you particularly want, like metadata or the favorites window to be more easily able to browse your images, you can search for it under the window drop-down. To easily mark which images you plan to edit, Bridge allows you to assign a star ranking to the images. To do so, you simply click the image in question and then click in any of the dots located just below it. This will allow you to set a star ranking between 1 and 5 stars. Once you've selected your images that you plan to use, you can use the drop down at the top marked by a star to select to only show images that fit within a certain star ranking, anywhere from 1 or more to only the 5-star images. To remove this, simply select Clear Filter and it'll allow you to see all images in the folder once again. As well, using the keyword tool, you can assign select keywords to the images. If, for example, shooting a wedding or event, you can mark things, whether they're ceremony, formals, family photos, or candid shots. This will allow you to better edit through the different categories without getting confused or flustered by a massive number of images. Whether using Lightroom or Photoshop and Bridge, when you open a RAW file, the first thing you will see is the Adobe Camera RAW interface. For this overview, I'll be going through some of the more simple tasks you can do in this to help you get an initial starting point. To the top left, there's a toolbar you can use for some of the more simple image adjustments. Zoom tool allows you to zoom in, or if you hold Alt and click, it'll zoom out. Double-clicking the zoom tool will automatically zoom to 100% of the image's size. If you want the image to fit, double-click the hand tool. This will allow you to see the entire image within the frame. When fully zoomed in, clicking the hand tool and then dragging it on the image allows you to move and adjust where on the image you're looking at. The first eyedropper tool is the white balance tool. This will allow you to select an area on the image that is supposedly pure white. If you click it, it'll automatically adjust the color of the image to match the white balance you have selected. This is not always foolproof and sometimes will leave you with a color image that's slightly too cool or too warm for your taste, so you can always manually adjust this later. The crop tool, which looks like a square with little tails on the end, is fairly self-explanatory too. Simply drag it over the image to select what you'd like to crop. You can change the shape and size simply by dragging any of the square boxes on the centers or corners of all 4 sides. If you'd like to constrain the ratio, hold Shift while dragging one of the corners and it'll keep the same aspect ratio as you crop it. The next tool, the Straighten tool, which appears to me to look like some sort of purse, is used to adjust the horizon line or to help align the image with geometric patterns if you are unable for any reason to do so while shooting. To do so, just click on the image and then drag in the direction you'd like to move that section. When you release, the crop will automatically be skewed to allow for a more accurate horizon line. Now this is not always perfect, but if you hover your mouse just beyond one of the quarters of the crop border, you'll see a rounded 2-point arrow. This will allow you to pull and slightly adjust to get a more perfect horizon line. There are a few other simple tools in here, such as the spot removal, red eye removal, and adjustment brush. However, I find it more intuitive to use these within Photoshop itself. Next up, we'll look at the right side of the screen. For initial editing purposes, you can largely ignore the top section. It'll show you which sections you're adjusting with what aspect of the sliders. For example, here in the center is what is adjusted by the exposure slider. Highlights is slightly to the right, whites to the far right, and inversely shadows and then blacks. For this, I will only be using the basic tab. You'll notice throughout here there are several others: tone and curves, detail, HSL and grayscale, split toning, lens correction, effects, and camera calibration. For the most part, you'll find yourself working in the basic tab. The white balance dropdown is a simple way to adjust for some common lighting concerns. Auto will attempt to pick the perfect white balance based on the color information in the image. Daylight will assume that there is a yellowish tint to the image, as is the case when in direct sunlight. Cloudy will assume that it is slightly blue and adjust it to be more yellow. The shade setting is quite similar, only it assumes a higher level of blue tone. Tungsten is the setting used when taking photos under standard incandescent lights. This assumes both a yellow temperature and a slight magenta tint and will adjust accordingly. Fluorescent, of course, is for images shot with fluorescent lighting, which will assume a heavy green tint and a yellow cast, both cooling the image and increasing the tint to be more magenta. Most flashes are cool and have a slight magenta tint, so using the flash setting will reduce the tint and increase the color temperature. For this, I'm going to stick with as shot and make adjustments manually. The temperature slider is easily adjusted, and you'll notice that slight adjustments make big changes to the color of your image. Similarly, tint will do the same, only with the color shifting from a reddish magenta to green. This is helpful if skin looks reddish or you've shot in a highly green environment like outdoors in nature. Sometimes you'll get a lot of green cast on the images, which will require increased tint. Now, as you saw up here in the levels, exposure is largely the midtones. However, adjusting it will adjust the entire image. You'll notice that everything gets darker as you slide it down, or brighter as you slide it up. If your image happened to be captured in a way that left it entirely too dark or entirely too bright, sometimes that image is still one of the best ones you have, so the exposure adjustment can really save the image in this. Contrast increases the difference between the dark and the light sections of the image. You'll notice as increasing it, the lights get brighter and the darks get darker. If your image has too high of contrast as shot, you can always reduce it to make the difference between the darks and the lights more subtle. The next four sliders, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, will influence specific areas on the histogram or levels. Whites and blacks adjust the extremes, the darkest of the dark for blacks and the brightest of the bright for whites. Reducing the blacks will add some more depth to the dark sections of the images, while inversely increasing the blacks will reduce some of the overall image contrast by bringing the darkest sections of the images up. And of course, inversely, the same with whites. The highest key elements of the photos will be brought down by adjusting the whites to a lower setting, or made more intense by adjusting the whites higher. You'll notice whites and blacks are very subtle adjustments. This is by design, as changing these very heavily will greatly impact your image, either for the better or for the worse. Highlights and shadows will adjust the parts of the image that aren't quite to the extreme ends. Reducing the highlights will allow you to bring down some of the lighter values that aren't at the very high end. This is similar to adjusting the middle tab on the levels adjustment. This can be useful for bringing some more color and depth back to skin tone or the sky, while maintaining the contrast of the image. The bottom 3 sliders should be used with caution, as they make some pretty significant changes with only slight adjustments. Clarity is the sharpness of the image. Reducing clarity, you'll notice the image becoming blurrier and hazier. While increasing it, you'll notice the sharpness dramatically increase. With most images, if I adjust the clarity, I do it by a small amount, usually under 10. However, if you're doing landscape, product, automobile, or similar photography, you might find the clarity slider to be of more use. Vibrance and saturation are often mistaken for one another because they do fairly similar things in a slightly different way. Vibrance is a smart tool made to adjust muted colors. This can be extremely helpful as it means it's less likely to greatly influence things such as skin tone while adjusting it. You'll notice these changes are more subtle. As I'm increasing it, the areas with more neutral colors, such as the grass and the house, are increasing in saturation, while the skin tone, though increasing, is doing so far more slightly. Saturation, however, deals with all colors. You'll notice as increasing this, everything becomes more saturated with color. For this reason, the saturation tool should be used cautiously. If you want an image to be black and white, it's as simple as turning the saturation all the way down to 0. However, I find it's usually best to do this in Photoshop as a separate layer. At the lower right of the image preview is an icon that looks like a Y within a piece of paper. This cycles between before and after views, so you can see the changes you've made. For example, here's 2 up horizontal, split down the center, 2 up vertical, split vertically, and 1 that simply shows the after image. Using this, you can see how just slight adjustments in these have dramatically changed the image. A closer view allows you to see this more. The increase in clarity has brought more sharpness to the hair, eyes, and facial features. The increased depth in the shadow and blacks has made these lines in the roof of the barn far easier to view. The increased saturation has brought out the yellows and greens in the plants behind the model. The decrease to the highlights has brought more details to the clouds above the barn. I hope this video has helped give you a better idea of the capabilities of Camera Raw and how it can be used to improve your images. If you have suggestions for other things you'd like to see me touch on in these editing tutorials, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe for future updates on editing how-tos, as well as photography and modeling how-to guides. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.